So there are conversations that happen behind closed doors that explain almost everything that teachers complain about it. And most of us, we never get to hear those conversations or we never get to hear about what takes place behind closed doors. But tonight, I want to pull back the curtain on the conversations that happen behind closed doors. And so, if you've ever wondered why serious behavior oftentimes gets ignored or overlooked, or why consequences seem to be so insignificant or they completely disappear, or why administrators seem to change their mind overnight about discipline issues, it usually isn't because they don't care. It's usually because there are pressures on administrators that most teachers never get to see. And so tonight, I want to walk you through 6 of the biggest reasons why school administrators can't discipline students. And as you all know, we do not bash administrators here. Number one, it wouldn't do any good, and number two, it just doesn't seem to be appropriate to me. So, for clarity, I want to go ahead and agree that some administrators are not good administrators, and you may have an administrator right now that's not a good administrator. I have had bad administrators in the past. I had one of the poorest administrators several years ago, many, many years ago, that I ever had. And the truth is, it's really the only bad administrator that I've ever had to work for. And I wouldn't want to go through that again. So I don't want to downplay the fact that some people, some teachers, have had to work for some really poor administrators because they have. But I want you to know that most administrators, I believe this. Now, you may disagree. I believe that they care about their school. I believe they care about the students. And I believe that they care about teachers. And so, one of the biggest reasons why school administrators can't discipline students, and you never hear this reason, is because discipline decisions are often tied to funding and not fairness. And so I want you to let that sink in for just a minute. You would think that discipline would be about fairness, or it would be about correcting. But oftentimes, discipline is not about fairness. It's not about what's good for the school. It's not about what's good for the students. It is oftentimes what is good for funding. And so sometimes discipline disappears because to have certain things on the record creates a funding problem. For instance, suspension and expulsion numbers, those numbers get reported upward, right? They go beyond the schoolhouse and they can affect state funding or even accreditation standing of a school. Specifically, expulsion numbers. Because expulsion numbers, when you expel a student from school, you lose the funding for that student. In Florida, and I don't know how it is elsewhere, but I can tell you how it is in Florida. Let's say that we go back in August and in September a student does something that rises to the level of expulsion, and we follow through with that and we expel that student. We lose funding for that student for the 26, 27, 28, and 29 school year because you can be expelled for 2 years in Florida. In fact, every expulsion that I've ever attended, and I've expelled close to 100 students, every expulsion has been for 2 years. I want you to hear that. Funding is lost for 2 years. And so when you think about it from that perspective, you have to understand that there are more stakeholders and deciders in whether somebody gets expelled than just the principal. Those decisions rise to the level of district administrators where they are looking at things completely different than what the classroom teacher looks at, or what the what the reading coach looks at, or what the math coach looks at, or what the guidance counselor looks at. They are looking at numbers that say, hey, if we fall below a certain level monetarily, it's going to put the entire district in jeopardy. Okay. And that means that teacher salaries come into jeopardy. Teacher raises, if you get raises in your district, are in jeopardy. Para salaries are in jeopardy. Busing is in jeopardy. Everything that you can think of that's encompassed in a school district comes into jeopardy, into danger of being lost if those numbers rise above a certain level, or if student attendance falls below a certain level. And I say all that to say this, is that when a discipline consequence is sometimes softened by an administrator, it's not always personal. Sometimes there are factors that we don't know about as teachers. Sometimes there are people looking at certain numbers that you and I don't even care about. I assure you we don't care about them. But the people above your administrator do. And that's why the same behavior can get wildly different responses from one district to the next. I say this all the time. My district is an outlier. We are a good district. We are not afraid of discipline at our district. We do at times run into the issue of expulsion and school numbers and things like that. And they have to be balanced. And I'll be honest with you, I'm the dean of students. And so, that falls on me to try to balance that just a little bit. But our district is an outlier. In fact, many people that would come to our school, you would think that we were harsh or way overboard. We don't see it that way. We see it as trying to hold students accountable for their behavior. But sometimes discipline consequences get softened, and that eats at us, because it makes us feel like we don't have support. It makes us feel like we're fighting a battle, that it's admin against teachers, or that it's district against teacher, or it's district against the teachers. When in reality, it's a lot of times it's the state against districts. And that is not to say that there aren't school boards that are just soft, they're just lame, they refuse to hold students accountable, they're afraid to take on these battles. It's not to say that those things don't happen. I just don't know to it that they're happening in most of the cases. The second reason is they're managing legal liability more than they are managing behavior. They manage legal liability more than they manage behavior. This is a reality in schools today. In particular, when you deal with students with an IEP, all right? And before anybody says anything, or before this thing goes across America and everybody gets mad, because it really does go across America, we do not have a problem with students that have IEPs. We're not concerned about IEPs, really, all right? What we have a problem with is when the IEP becomes a weapon, when the IEP is the thing that stands and becomes the barrier to correcting poor behavior. And when we talk about students with IEPs, we are not talking about special education kids that deal with autism and traumatic brain injuries, and on and on and on. That's not what we're talking about. Okay. I work with special education kids. They are the most wonderful, most joyful, happiest, oftentimes the most well behaved kids on campus. I absolutely love those students. What we're talking about, and I don't want to minimize this, but what we're talking about is you have a student that has difficulty reading. So we get them an IEP, or they have ADHD, or they're diagnosed with ADHD or something. And all of a sudden, that becomes the blanket that protects them regardless of what the level of behavior is. I have a problem with that. I have a severe problem with that because number one, I've been in this business long enough to have students that had IEPs and they were protected only to graduate and then find themselves locked up in the slammer, can't get out, going to prison for a long time. And I can't help but feel that in many ways that we contributed it to that issue of causing students to think that there are no consequences for their behavior, or causing students to think that when they get in trouble, their parent can show up with an advocate that will bend the direction of a discipline decision. Because every decision carries a liability calculation. And without a doubt, and I'm not saying that it's right, it's the principal that has to think those things through. They have to think those things through. In fact, if they don't think those things through very well and they make a poor decision, that decision will most likely get overturned by the district, by their district, or by their ESE department in their district. And so principals have to work with the district leadership, and they are most likely going to have to bend to whatever that district leadership says. Right? There just isn't any getting out of it. A parent threatening to escalate to a lawyer can and does shape a decision that then in turn directly impacts the structure of a classroom. And 8 years into it, dealing with student discipline, dealing with IEPs and 504s, I can tell you that it is a go-to, that I'm going to get a lawyer and I'm going to do this and I'm going to sue. And, the truth is obviously not everybody does that, but there are plenty of parents. There are plenty of people. They're just looking for, and they're just waiting for an opportunity to try to sue because they believe they're going to get something out of it. And there are plenty of lawyers who are more than happy to sue school districts. They want state money. They want to get involved. They're not there necessarily to try to help. I don't even believe that for a minute, those lawyers. They're there for financial gain and to make things difficult in a school system. And it's just my opinion. It's 100% my opinion. I think that IDEA has to be relooked at because I do not believe that at its inception that IDEA was intended to be a weapon that becomes the carte blanche ticket for poor behavior in school. Now, with that being said, sometimes you have discipline decisions that involve a student with an IEP and also a student who is gen ed. So let me ask you a question and tell me what you think. If a student with an IEP gets into a fight with a kid who is gen ed and it's mutual, they're both at fault, right? Should you give the gen ed student the full consequence while only giving the IEP student a partial consequence? I run into this all the time. Sometimes the IEP, as you know, most of you in here know that if a student with an IEP can only be suspended up to 10 days, and then you have to have manifestation determinations, which you may lose. The school may lose a manifestation determination. So if you have a kid with an IEP that you've already spent 4 or 5 or 6 days on, right? Do you give the gen ed kid the full ride while you can only give the IEP kid a couple of days? From my perspective, the answer to that is no. All right. So now you have a serious issue and you have to back down on the consequences because you don't want to cheat this kid over here because of this thing over there. That's just my opinion. You tell me what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear it. All right. So every decision carries a liability calculation. Principals are managing legal liability more than they have to manage behavior, and it's absolutely true. And that's why obvious consequences are oftentimes they're just walked back. And that is the way it is. There's nothing that can really be done about it. And I bring all this up because I want to say this. When you hear it from that perspective and you understand it from that perspective as a teacher, all of a sudden, the removal of a consequence or the softening of a consequence or the handing out of a consequence that just doesn't make sense. Now, all of a sudden, it's not personal. All right. I'm like you guys. All right. If I'm in the classroom and I write a referral and we're supposed to get some this, that, or the other, and then it seems like we're not getting any help. I'm like you. I'm with you guys. I feel offended and I take it personal. But sometimes it's not personal. Sometimes there's nothing. There's just really nothing that can be good, that can be done. That would be helpful. Let's see here. Lori Grissom. I find that I have to educate my parents as well as my students. You absolutely did. All right. And that is a great point right there, is keeping an open line of communication with parents and telling them, sharing with them how things work, what it is that we got to do and what the expectations are, and working with them. That is the best thing that you can possibly do. Adam, I appreciate it. All right, man. I appreciate that, man. I don't know if everything I say is spot on. I'm pretty opinionated. I try to keep a lot of it to myself. But that's the way it is. All right, Todd makes a good point right here. Todd, appreciate you being in here. There are good parents, but there are crazy parents that teachers have to deal with all the time. And you know what the truth of it is? You're 100% right. I don't know how many thousands of phone calls, parent phone calls I make in a year's time, but it really is in the thousands. And I got to say, it has to be that 98, maybe 97% of those phone calls are fairly positive. They're fairly positive. Not all of them are as positive as I would like it to be. Sometimes parents push back and they make it clear. They're like, there's a lot of parents say, look, man, I'm not fighting against you, but that's my kid. And I just want to advocate for my kid. And I get that. And I'm all for that. And then there's like the 3%, that are just unhinged, undone, unbelievable, intolerable. Those are the ones that make it very, very hard. I bet you guys agree with that. There's some really good parents out there, but the ones that just make it difficult make up for all the ones or override all the ones that are really so good to deal with. All right, nowadays all you need to do is say I have ADHD, and yeah, well, you can't really get that at my school. You got to have some documentation, and it's got to come to a certain level, and it's got to meet some criteria. But I'm sure that you're right in some places. Yeah, I feel bad for the kids that are going to go into the world too. 99% of the time, a lawyer tells the silly parent that they have no case. I don't know. I think 99% of the time they tell them they do have a case, whether they don't or not. I think they just like to get money. And if somebody walks in and they got $10,000 to throw down for a retainer, I think they'll jump in front of them and cause a problem. That's what I call. That's what I think. Hey, thanks, Todd. Appreciate the agreement right there. Lori, good to see. Even if you can determine that the behavior is not a result of the disability, admin doesn't like to put the child in school because the student needs to be in class. So, all right. So again, I'm going to tell you, my school is an outlier. All right, my school is an outlier, and I know, all right, Lord, because what you put up there, and I know from talking to many teachers around the nation and around the world that you're absolutely right about that. The one thing that I want to say is that is not the case at my school. All right, there does have to be a balance with the kid being in class and out of class. Absolutely understand that. But at our school, if we can't give some OSS, we're going to assign some ISS, and we're just going to live with it. That's the stand of my school. But you know what? That flows from the top down. That doesn't just happen because of me. In fact, it can't happen because of me. It only happens because the people above support that type of thinking and that type of work. And I get that not everybody doesn't have that. And matter of fact, I would imagine that most schools don't have that. So I'm going to drop a couple things in the chat right here. First of all, these are all of our teacher resources. I want to drop them over there. I drop them in there every week, and you guys are so good to take advantage of them. Could be somebody that's listening here that is brand new, and so I want to put this invitation for you up there. If you're here and you're new, or if you haven't told us in a while, tell us your grade level, your content area, and your state. The most important thing to me actually is the state, because I absolutely love to know where we're reaching people. Some of the most reach areas are the Northeast, Connecticut, Maine, and on up in that way, New York, and also in California. So there's a broad area between there, North Carolina, Virginia, Florida. Lots of people come in here from Florida. Of course, I'm in Florida. And so we appreciate all of you jumping in. In the chat over there is a link to most, if not all, of our resources. You're going to see one there that goes to free resources. Check all that out. Also, if you don't already have a reading list, I'm dropping one for you right here if you like to read. Currently, I'm reading Maria Forleo. Maria Forleo. I think she's Italian. She's from New York. Everything is figure outable. I like the book. All right. I have to warn you, she's a little salty. Okay. So you have to be prepared for that and just have to work your way around that. But it's a good book. It's a good book about resilience. It's a good book about white knuckle. We're going to figure it out, and we're not going to let fear overcome us. So y'all check that out. Another good book, and this really is a good book, in particular for teachers, specifically the first chapter. I have no idea what this book costs. I just buy them whenever I see them. Is Dan Martell, Buy Back Your Time. Top notch. And I don't know a teacher in here that doesn't need to buy back their time so that you can use your time somewhere else. So jump in and grab those books. I dropped the Amazon link. And again, my favorite, I'm trying to reach it over here, I can't get a hold of anything, is Sandra Dalton Smith's Sacred Rest. I cannot recommend this book enough. All right. You can't read it too many times. It will just help you that much. So jump down there in the description box or in the chat box. It's in there for you. Get it. Oh, look right here. What was I just telling you? There it is. Southern Cal. That's what I'm talking about. Grade 2. It's technically against the law in California to give a recess detention. Hey, you know what? I just made a video, and I put it up the other day, and it's talking about 4 traps that teachers get caught in. I called them the parent traps. All right, not trying to be negative to parents, because it's really not about parents. It's really about you and I. And one of the examples that I use in there is that of a lunch detention and a parent not liking the consequence and getting their kids out of consequences. And here, in Southern California, you have exactly what Lee 9311 points out is that now all of a sudden certain things are against the law and you can't do them. And let me ask you a question. Okay, maybe I'm wrong, but if they tell me that it's against the law to deny a kid recess, I'm not going to give recess detention because there's a penalty that's going to come along with that. And the truth of the matter is I have gotten used to living indoors with air conditioning and being able to eat whatever kind of food that I want to eat. I'm used to that. And I don't want to lose that. Well, if I think that way, how much more do our administrators think that way? That they've worked hard, some of them, not all of them. Some people have been promoted into positions that they have no business being in. Okay, but some or most have worked hard to get into these positions. They have established a career. They have a retirement on the line. They got to pay bills just like you and I. Why would they intentionally want to stick their neck out and get their neck cut off just because that's what can happen to them? I like living indoors. All right, what is this? Is this is it Stacy or I can't see, my eyes are so bad. High school, St. Louis, Missouri. My dad is from Missouri, a little place outside of St. Louis called, I think, Irington, Missouri. I was there several times whenever I was a kid. I haven't been back. Loved the Ozarks out there, though. That was a great time. Lori says the same thing. She says that they can't give recess detention either. All right. We don't want to deprive kids of anything. We don't want to take anything away. And now it's got the force of law or the force of policy. And you can literally lose your job over it. So no wonder in many cases, administrators have a hard time enforcing discipline. And that's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about why school administrators can't discipline students and the truth that teachers never hear about it. And number one reason is because discipline decisions are often tied to funding and not to fairness. And number two, administrators are managing legal liability more than they're managing behavior. And we're going to jump to number three, but we're going to get back to Teacher Talk Investigates here for just a second. And we're going to get over to email number 2, if I can figure out where I left all that stuff. I don't even know what I'm doing here tonight. All right. I'm all solo and I'm trying to figure it out by myself. And so let me see if I can get to it. Here we go. Let's get it up there. And let's move on to email number 2. All right. Right there. Wild parent emails. Email number 2 is about the Cold War. And this parent says the Cold War has no snow. And they feel like it's misleading because if there was no ice or freezing temperatures, then why call it cold? This seems like false advertising and confusing for students. So she wants the parent, or he wants the parent, to clarify whether thermometers were involved. And if not, please consider renaming it to avoid misinformation. You absolutely can't make that up. That's what teachers deal with in the classroom. That's why parents are sometimes mad at teachers. That's why teachers are beside themselves in the classroom nowadays. Because they get emails like that. Adam points out right here that depriving kids of things for misbehavior is necessary. It absolutely is necessary. It's 100% necessary. Okay, nobody gets to go through this world without consequences, whether they're consequences that are handed out by somebody or they're natural consequences. All right. And I got to be honest, sometimes whenever we're at school, boys and girls in particular in middle school do some pretty dumb stuff right? We ought not run up and down the hallway, and we ought not be horseplaying in the hallway. And sometimes they run up and down the hallway, and sometimes they horseplay. And guess what? They get hurt. And the teachers are like, you better get after them. I'm like, why? They just learned a pretty good lesson right there. Natural consequences. That's right. Todd, he is amazed that you can't give recess detention. That's crazy. Some kids need recess detention. Not all, but some. That's right. You know what? Here's the thing. If you want to be, if you get a recess detention or a lunch detention, it's because you were doing something annoying in class. It's not because you were breaking major policies at school. And so here's the thing. If you want to be annoying and get your socialization uh, issues on in classroom, then you can lose your socialization privileges elsewhere. That's what I'm talking about. I got to have some water. You got to excuse me. I got something in my throat here tonight. All right, Pittsburgh Pirates 14, man. Thanks for jumping in. He says the parent who wrote that email should be placed on an IEP. You're 100% right. You're 100% right. Wait till you see the next two. Wait till you see the next two. They get even better. All right? They get even better. So let's move on right here. And number 3, why school administrators can't discipline students, the truth that teachers never hear. Staffing shortages mean that they sometimes can't back you up the way that you would like, or even the way that they would like. And this is an issue that's going to be extraordinarily prevalent this year and probably for the next 3, 4, 5 years. Let me know in the chat with a 1 if your school district is having a budget crisis. A budget crisis. I think I think about every school district in the nation is having a budget crisis. I know that ours is. The county that I live in is absolutely having a budget crisis, on and on and on. Out in Texas, in Fort Worth, they had about 1,000 teachers quit there the other day because the Texas State Board of Education is like infiltrating and taking over their schools. Houston ISD over the last couple of years have had something like they've had 10,000 teachers quit, and they've had somewhere in the neighborhood of about 13,000 teachers quit, and somewhere in the neighborhood of about 4,500 teachers non-renewed. So over the last couple of years, they've lost 17,500 highly qualified, multiple year teachers that had been in the business for a good while. 17,000 of them they've pushed out, and they're replacing them with first year teachers that can't stay long enough. They can't get through it because it's too difficult. Everybody in this audience knows how hard it is to be a first year teacher in today's climate. So staffing shortages are going to cause problems elsewhere. One of the things that has happened because of staffing shortages is number 1, alternative placement schools in most places are completely full. They're over populated with students, and they're understaffed with personnel. Or a lot of districts have done away with alternative placements or an actual alternative school. And again, that comes down to dollars. It comes down to the fiscal reality of having to fund those programs. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying that districts, well, I am saying that districts, they need to reprioritize how they spend dollars. We spend a lot of money with curriculum companies and ed tech stuff and all kinds of other stuff that does not move the needle as it relates to a student's education. And in the midst of doing that, we reprioritize dollars away from things that are extraordinarily important. We have to have alternative schools in alternative settings where students can be removed from the classroom, even if it's temporary, because a student, even a student with an IEP, can be removed from the general education setting, at least in Florida, with a manifestation and a change of placement meeting for 45 days. 45 days. All right. That is something that needs to happen if a student has reached the level of chronic disruption. That needs to happen. We need a place for these students to go where they can refocus their attention, understand that there are consequences and that there are expectations for them when they return to the classroom. But what we're seeing today, because of staffing shortages, is that a student oftentimes gets sent back to class because there's nowhere else for them to go. It's not because your administration doesn't necessarily believe that we have a problem. They know we have a problem, but they don't have a good way to solve it. And so there's really nothing else for them to do other than send them back. They can't take them out and sit them in the hallway. They can't tell them that they can't come to school. What else are they to do? Now, again, that is not to say that some schools and some districts and some administrators don't have bad PBIS policies, because some do have bad PBIS policies where they're actually rewarding the poor behavior. All right. When you think about a kid that comes into class every day and they want to disrupt, and you put them out of class and they go up to the front office and they know that they're going to get to sit there and talk with their favorite guidance counselor or their favorite office personnel, and then they're going to get some water and maybe some chips, and then they're going to get sent back to class. Why do you think they're disrupting class every day? We have reinforced poor behavior. You cannot, if you can avoid it, reinforce inappropriate behavior, because all you'll get is more inappropriate behavior. But in some cases, I realize that some administrators do that, and they're wrong. Some districts do that, and they're wrong. But in a lot of cases, there's so much of a staffing shortage, there's nowhere to put some students. Districts need to reprioritize how they spend funds. And I know this doesn't make it less frustrating, but it does change the fact that at least we don't look at it and feel like and think that this is personal, because in most cases it's not. The fourth reason, oftentimes, why school administrators can't discipline students, the truth that teachers never hear, is because their own evaluations are often tied to metrics that reward looking good on paper versus actually having a good organization. Now, I want you to let that slide in there real easy. At how much the people above your principal, your administration, the people that are above them, how badly, because they don't have to come and deal with the problem. They don't have to go into the classroom. They don't have to walk the halls and try to manage student behavior and student movements. They don't have to do that. And I'm not saying that they don't care about it, but what I am saying is that they like to look good on paper in front of the state administrators. And so oftentimes the evaluation of the principal is tied to those metrics. So if the suspension, out of school suspension numbers get too high, it's a problem because that's data that goes to the state. If the in school suspension gets too high, that's data that goes to the state. And I have sat personally in Florida with the Office of Safe Schools that went through our referrals and wanted to know, this is the question that they wanted to know, is why do you have so many out of school suspensions with so little of assessor discipline incidents? An assessor discipline incident in Florida, I don't know if that terminology is used all throughout the United States, but assessor discipline incident in Florida is like a level 3 or a level 4. And the indication that the Office of Safe Schools was giving is that if you don't have a assessor, an elevated level of discipline, like a battery or a weapon or some serious type of misconduct, drugs or alcohol or something like that, then you really shouldn't be having these elevated numbers of OSS. That was the message that was communicated. Thank the Lord, my school doesn't agree with that. My administration doesn't agree with that. And so I don't have to do that. But those numbers and how it looks on paper is part of, they are factored into your administrator's performance review. Another thing, graduation rate. Why do you think that whenever kids become a senior or they get into their junior year, all of a sudden, those absences don't seem to matter as much? Right? Their behavior, we're willing to work with it a little bit more because we don't want them to get expelled, because graduation rate is figured by when a student goes into the 9th grade, 4 years later, they have to be graduated. And if they're not, that graduation rate comes down because you have to graduate with your cohort. That's why those decisions get made a lot of time, because there is real pressure on the administrator to minimize the numbers instead of addressing the root causes. And I know that that's difficult. It's really hard. It's not right. But that is the way it is. And that's why sometimes school administrators can't discipline students. And it's also the truth that some people have never heard. Data oftentimes matters more than the actual student and the actual teacher that stands in front of the administrator. I don't think they want it that way. I just think it is that way. So here's the thing. Pittsburgh Pirates 14, 100% adults are the problem. Unacceptable behavior is reinforced. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we spend a lot of time doing it at school. Right? Not necessarily on purpose. Okay, I'm giving as much grace as I can here. But that is exactly what's happening. He also points out, great point, appearances, unfortunately, is everything. It is. Nobody wants to look bad. Nobody wants to dig and get dirt under their fingernails. But you can't root these things out if all you do is overlook the issues. All right, because you want to look good on paper. All right, but that's above your, that is above your administrator. All right, Laura, I agree. So glad this is my last year teaching. 30 years is enough for me. I'm not going to make it 30. 3 more. I'm leaving at 20. All right. I was almost going to leave this year. Almost left over the summer. I had some opportunities pop up and I just about took it. But I didn't. All right. Who we got right here? Get that up there. Wilbur D.D. Powell. Good to see. Our school puts them in ISS for the block. I'm cool with that. If I have a paraprofessional, I'll walk with the kids and talk while we're walking. It works for me 95% of the time. Yeah, so we do that a little bit. We don't do it too much. All right, and the reason why is because sometimes what happens is if you allow that to happen, the next thing you know, that kid's down there for that block every single time you turn around. And that's not the goal of discipline. Again, uh, I am convinced that you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. There are some kids that are just bad. They're really bad. All right. And we got to weed those kids out. But most kids come to class. What do you think their reasons for disruption and misbehavior are? And I'll just be honest with you, I'm going to tell you what it is. It's task avoidance. It's 100% what I believe. Kids want to avoid hard tasks because we've given them phones and we've given them Chromebooks, and they can just look at stuff, right? And that's easier to watch a video, or it's easier to turn on the music. It's just task avoidance. I'm 100% convinced of that. You guys can chime in and tell me what you think. All right, but Wilbur, it is a good idea. Wilbur, also, if you don't mind, drop in the chat down here and tell us this right here. Tell us your grade level, content area, and state, in particular your state, because we love to know who it is that we're reaching. All right, Todd, brother, here you go. I know I'm going to sound crazy. I think the districts needs cut back on sports programs and put it into putting it on teachers hiring. Well, so I don't know how sports programs work at other schools in other states or other districts. But I will tell you this, that there is $0 that come from our district into sports programs. Zero. The school is 100% responsible for, and the individual sports are 100% responsible for raising their own money from the community. And that gets done in a lot of different ways. You know, they have barbecues and sell banners and have raffles and, the gate money that comes through, through ticketing and stuff like that. All of that stuff is how that gets taken care of. So I don't know how it works where you're at. It could be that those school districts do put money into those athletic programs, but not in my district. It doesn't happen. And if they are pouring it in there, you're 100% right. They need to put it towards teacher pay. Pittsburgh Pirates 14. The appearance problem is huge in South Carolina. I guarantee it. Looks good on the surface, but garbage underneath. I hate it for the kids. You're 100% right. That's what our administrators are up against. All right. It is. Wilbur, high school math in Virginia. Good to see you, brother. Thank you for dropping in. We appreciate it. All right, let's get back to Teacher Talk Investigates. Let's look at email number 3. Email number 3. If I can get it up here and get everything to cooperate with me, which I think I can. Nope, almost got it wrong. Right here. Don't forget to social distance. During the pandemic, a parent said that her son felt uncomfortable being in a Zoom classroom. She said, I can only communicate with him if she was copied in an email. Can anybody tell me how you can feel uncomfortable in a Zoom meeting? Anybody? Can anybody tell me I didn't share that thing out right, did I? Got to get that thing over there on full screen. Now we can see a little bit better. How can you feel uncomfortable in a Zoom meeting? During the hardest time in education in the 21st century, or even the 20th century, this is what teachers deal with right here. That's the kind of stuff that they have to deal with. Somebody answer that. Also, one thing I want to remind you of, and I'm going to drop it right here in the chat, is I know a lot of us are going back to school probably this week or within the next. I got to go in 2 days this week, Monday and Tuesday, for coaching stuff and this, that, and the other. But I'm full-time back on Friday. And here's what I'd love for you to do. Is I would love for you to send to me at this email. It's in the chat right now, or at least it's coming up there. John at teachertalkwithjohn.com. Send me your craziest professional development, in service professional development, or the craziest, wildest thing that you've had to do, or the thing that you hate the most. Send that to me right there at that email in the chat. John at teachertalkwithjohn.com. get it and send it over here. And we don't disclose teacher names or anything like that. We'll absolutely we don't share that, but we want to read them out to the crowd. Okay, Torch. Let's see what he says. He could be right here. He's gonna straighten me. In Zoom meetings, perhaps they don't like having the camera on. If it's the camera, then I'm at a loss. Well, they could have blocked it out, right? Aren't you're able to do that, right? If you block it out and your name is up there. I guess that was a problem though during COVID because you had no way of knowing if there was somebody on the other end of it. But I guess they could have just responded in the chat, or they could have raised a hand or something like that, or whatever. See, I'm gonna flip that thing. They could have just done that, right? In the Zoom. I don't know. But that's what happened. Todd, I'm kind of like you. I like Zoom calls. I actually use Google Meets for all the stuff that I do, but Zoom is just as good either way. So there you have it. Once again, email to us the dumbest thing, the thing that you hate the most, a wild and crazy story. It doesn't have to be from this year. It could be from years in the past, and just tell us about it. Man, that's a good deal. High school math in Florida. Go Gators, because I'm in Florida too. I'm assuming that you're a Gator and you're not one of those Seminoles up there in Tallahassee, or you're not with the U down south. Let me know, because I'm in the heart of Gator country. I live about 25 minutes from the stadium, and that is just where we're at. Okay, so let us know. All right, so six reasons why school administrators can't discipline students. The truth that teachers never hear. Number one, just to recap for everybody, discipline decisions are often tied to funding and not fairness. Number two, they're managing legal liability more than they're managing behavior. Number three, staffing shortages mean that sometimes they can't back you the way that you want or the way that they want. Number four, their own evaluations are often tied to the metrics that reward looking good on paper versus being an actual organization need. All right, and number five, and we got two more. Don't take off before number six. Number six is the one I really want you to hear. Number five, they're absorbing pressure from multiple directions that you never see. That you never see, we never see, I never see. Sometimes superintendents, school board, state officials, parents, the system in general, people with direct lines to the Department of Education, which is every parent in the country, and believe me, they will call. I've had more than one DOE complaint, right, because of disciplining a student. Administrators have to absorb that pressure. And they can't just pass it off. They can't give the responsibility to somebody else. And sometimes they can't deal with it honestly. And what I mean by that is they can't deal with it honestly by blaming their bosses publicly. We pointed out whenever we started, Sarah Ann pointed out that, these administrators are too political. Well, that's true, because it is a political position. Even though you're not elected to it, it is a political position. And if you're not willing to play by the rules of politics, you'll lose your job. And getting fired can be difficult in the teaching business, because depending upon how that firing goes down, you can lose your retirement. You can become unemployable. Especially in my area, in a small area where people know everybody for 3, 4, 5, 6 counties around. It can be tough. They can't blame their bosses publicly. They can't talk about parents publicly. They can't respond publicly and tell everybody what is the truth. They can't speak openly in staff meetings. They can't, because those words filter their way back into the ears of people who are waiting to put them out of business. And so what do administrators often do? They stay silent. They don't say anything. And as teachers, we often look at that and we take that to mean that they're not doing anything, or that they don't care, or that they're not taking a tough stand for the school. And yet what I know from experience is that many of them are taking a stand. They're doing as much as they can. Now that's not all of them. Some of them don't take a stand. Some administrators do sell out their teachers, and they do sell out their school, all for personal gain. So I don't want you to misunderstand. I'm not naive. I'm just saying that in most cases, that's not the case. It's just not the case. They're under a lot of pressure. Administrators are. I don't know if we have an administrator in here. If we do, God bless you. All right. And I want you to know that if nobody else understands, I really do understand this. And I would not want to be in your shoes. Now, I want to repeat that the goal here, because we don't bash administrators here. Well, some the chat box can. I whatever you guys say is up to you. But I don't bash administrators. All right. The goal here is for us as teachers to help to have some understanding, so that we don't take what we think is the lack of decision making or the lack of action of an administrator, that we don't take it personal and let it run us into the ground. All right. And it's far too easy for us to go into our classrooms and talk to our colleagues and say, well, what they need to do is this. And if I was in that role, this is what I would do. Or if I had to make the decision, this is the decision I would make. And probably none of that's true, because we're saying all of those things without being under the same pressure that they're under. Okay. Number 6. This is the one that I really want everybody to hear. At one point, every single administrator started exactly where you are. Exactly where you are. And I want that to reframe. I want that to help us reframe the way we think about our administration, because we're all going back to school here. I'm going this week. Some of you are going next week. Some of you go in September, whatever it is, right? You're getting started. And we're going to be right back to most of us with the same administrator. And having a different perspective whenever we walk in the door can set the tone for the school year. Many of those administrators were teachers just like you that stood in the hallway and talked about their administrator at the time, how they needed to do this and how they should do that. And if it was them, they would do that. Well, now they're finding out that it's not that easy. Many administrators took the role of administrator because they wanted to change things from the inside out. And what they've learned is that they can't. The system is too much. In fact, Torch over here puts in the comments right here, it is a systemic problem. It is a systemic problem. Education, public education in America, is systemically broken. The whole reason why I went into education is because I didn't like the way education was going, and I wanted to change education. Well, I'm 17 years into it now, and I realize I can't change the education system. The only thing that I can really do as a teacher and now as dean of students, the only thing that I can really do is I can affect some low level school level policy, but most importantly, I can affect the lives of students. And don't overlook how important that is, right? Many administrators wanted to change this thing from the inside out, and now they're discovering that their ability to do that, their authority to do that, is completely limited. And you know what? That's got to be its own kind of burnout for administrators, is the fact that coming to the realization that there's really nothing you can do. And if you're going to be in the system, then you're going to go along to get along, and that's going to be that. If you don't, you will be out of the system. Anybody disagree with that? I think it's right. Torch, a gator, but this is going to be a tough one. He's got one starting FSU in a month. Well, let me share something with you. My oldest son, he got the, whatever that is, the whole Florida scholarship thing. He got it 100%. His college was completely paid for. We live 25 minutes from University of Florida. Where does he go to school? Florida State. Go figure that. Goes up there and he studies environmental science. Well, he could study environmental science as a Gator, couldn't he? And probably could have got us a few football tickets at a cheaper price. I mean, who's going to drive to Tallahassee? Well, a lot of people drive to Tallahassee to watch football, but it's not going to be this guy. Might go up there if they give him to me. Otherwise, we're going to stay right here in the area. Torch, if you get a chance, drop me a note. I'd love to know what school you teach at. It's there in the chat box somewhere. I'll drop it right there. I'd love to, because you might be close to me. If I can get it in there. Right there. Drop it. Let me know. All right. Teacher Talk Investigates. Let's jump back to it right here. Last email of the night. Let's move it along because this has been a great live. You're a great audience. It's been a wonderful time. There have been so many people in here. And I can't believe the reach that Teacher Talk is making nowadays. And it's all due to you guys right here. Last email. About consumerism. We simply buy things because we need them and sometimes because Target had a sale. I worry you're encouraging my child to think critically about economic systems. You should have cut the email off right there. Please stick to topics like birds or the branches of government, but not too deeply. You're encouraging my child to think critically about economic systems. Could you imagine getting an email like that and opening that thing up and reading that? Wouldn't that be insanity? You're trying to make my kid think critically. Wilbur, I'm coming off the best school year that I've ever had. I'm a little scared of what next year will look like. I had the dream. The dream. I'm trying not to have dreams, and that may mean that I have to sleep. So I got to tell you, I came off of a fairly good year last year. It was a very, 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 oh yeah, Torch, thanks for putting it in there, Bright Futures. Man, I couldn't come up with it. You would think that I'm not even a Florida teacher. Thanks for picking me up on that one. Man, I couldn't come up with that for the life of me. Yep, he got it 100%. So I had a fairly good year, but it was an extraordinarily hard year. But it was fun. I had a lot of fun, and I know that we've got some new pieces to our team this year, and so I got to be honest with you. I think it's going to be a great year this year, where I teach or where I work, and I'm almost excited about going back. That email is a compliment. Oh, did you send me an email? Okay, I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you guys. All right, before we go, just a couple things. I want to drop a few more things in the chat for you. A couple things. I'm on my own tonight, so I'm not doing very good. Dr. Pender was supposed to be with me tonight, but she had a family emergency and she had to scoot out and take off and go across the state. First of all of our resources can be found right here at these links. Some of them are free; they're not all free. I got to keep the station going somehow. Well, I said station. I don't know why I said that, but some of them are free. Not of them are. The one thing that I do want to encourage you to do, all right, is get in on this read list if you can. Some good books right there. They're very helpful. I don't know what your reading life is like, but whatever it is, it needs to be something. Okay, it needs to be something. All right. Finally, all right. My coaching load is picking up, and I'm super excited about that. And I want to invite those of you that need to have somebody to talk to, somebody to work through some issues with. That is exactly what I had to do for 3 years, as a matter of fact. You can grab a discovery call with me right here at the QR code, or it's linked down in the description, or it's one of the links that I put there in the chat. I want to encourage you to do that. All right. Teaching is tough. It's always been tough, and it's always going to be tough. It is not easy. We work in a system that is fundamentally flawed, and the flaws of that system have a profound effect upon the teacher. And teachers are dropping out left and right. All right. Our goal here is to help you stay strong and keep teaching. We want you to stay teaching. Keep teaching. Doesn't matter if it's in public school, private school, where it's at, but we want to help you stay strong and keep teaching. And it's tough everywhere. All right. I tell it all the time. 4 years ago, I woke up, my face went completely paralyzed. I thought I had a stroke. I mean, everybody thought I had a stroke. The kids at school would walk up to me and they'd be like, "Hey, Miller, man, what in the world happened to you? Did you have a stroke?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I couldn't even move my face." Right. It turned out it was chronic stress and it near about killed me. All right. And that's what teaching does, can do. And a lot of you have been in those shoes. All right. And what I'm saying is that you might end up in those shoes, but you don't have to stay in those shoes, and you don't have to be in those shoes alone. All right. Book a discovery call and let's get going, and let's make this year the best year that you've ever had, because it really can be that way. It really can. No, I no. Hey, Pittsburgh Virus 4 down. Appreciate you jumping in. No, she's well. She's doing well. She's had an emergency pop up and she had to take off, and so she wasn't able to make it tonight. All right, guys, appreciate you. Best live we've had in a long time. We're getting up next to school, and they always increase whenever we go back to school. Appreciate you. Again, drop us a note. Tell us about your wildest, the dumbest thing, the thing that you hate the most about in-service professional development, so we can read it on the air and have a little bit of fun. All right. See y'all next Sunday.